For more than 100 years, global trade has depended on the same narrow canals to transport almost everything we use in daily life. Then China opened a completely new path through the Arctic, shorter, colder, and far more disruptive than most experts expected. And now, that single frozen corridor is slowly shifting influence away from the traditional powers that once controlled global shipping. China's new Arctic shortcut comes to life. If you look at ship tracking maps on most days, they all seem predictable. Lines stretch out from eastern China, move down past India, squeeze through the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, and then spread toward Europe. But in the autumn of 2025, something unusual caught the attention of people watching those maps closely. One route broke away from the pattern. A vessel named Istanbul Bridge departed from the crowded coastline near Ningbo and Jushan and headed north instead of south, avoiding the usual choke points. Rather than steering toward the Red Sea, it traveled above Russia, across the Arctic Ocean, and only then turned down toward Britain. This ship, operated by the Chinese company Sea Legend, was not making a symbolic journey. It was carrying nearly 5,000 standard containers packed with goods European customers needed before the holiday rush. Leaving Ningbo Zushan in late September, it was scheduled to arrive at Felixstowe, Britain's largest container port, in roughly 18 to 20 days. By comparison, the traditional southern route would have required about 40 days through the Suez Canal and nearly 50 days of sailing around the Cape of Good Hope. Even the faster China-Europe freight trains typically take around 25 days. This Arctic voyage nearly cut the travel time in half. And this was not just a one-time experiment. Ningbo Zushan Port officially announced the opening of the world's first China-Europe Arctic Express service. The route links major Chinese ports such as Qingdao and Ningbo with Felixstowe, before continuing on to Rotterdam, Hamburg, and Gdansk. Representatives from Sea Legend and local customs authorities described plans for regular seasonal trips, faster restocking for European retailers, and lower storage expenses since exporters would no longer need to ship products 6 or 7 weeks early. In simple terms, China had activated a new trade lane and informed global buyers that the Arctic shortcut was ready for business. To understand how significant this shift is, we need to rewind more than a decade. In the summer of 2013, China's state-owned shipping giant COSCO sent a vessel named Yongxing from ports near Shanghai and Dalian to Rotterdam using the same northern corridor. Instead of turning south toward the Strait of Malacca and the Suez Canal, the ship followed Russia's Arctic coastline. That northern stretch shortened the journey by several thousand miles and saved approximately 1 to 2 weeks compared with a normal southern route. At the time, many analysts and reporters viewed the trip as more of an experiment than a commercial breakthrough, part business test, part scientific trial. Over the following summers, only a handful of Chinese flagships attempted the passage, each voyage carefully planned. Russian-ized pilots joined on board, and every journey required close monitoring of ice conditions, insurance regulations, and transit fees. Progress was real, but it was far from a dependable schedule that global supply chains could trust. The key takeaway from those early missions was clear. The route was possible, but only within a limited seasonal window and only with Russian support. A stronger signal of Beijing's long-term intentions came in January 2018, when China released its official Arctic policy document. In it, the country described itself as a nearctic state and expressed its goal of cooperating with other nations to develop a polar Silk Road through Arctic shipping corridors. The policy encouraged Chinese companies to invest in northern infrastructure and to conduct more trial voyages so that these routes could gradually become stable commercial lanes. Still, most of the actual traffic at sea remained tied to Russian energy exports, oil, gas, and coal, while the vision of a steady China-Europe Arctic shipping line largely remained an ambition on paper. To see what has changed, it helps to understand the geography. The Northern Sea route runs along Russia's Arctic coastline. It begins near the Kara Sea east of Norway's North Cape, curves past the Laptev and East Siberian seas, and eventually reaches a narrow Bering Strait separating Russia from Alaska. Russian law treats this corridor as a special coastal zone. Foreign vessels must apply for permission, stick to designated channels, and comply with Russian rules regarding pilots and navigation control. The only reason this shortcut is usable at all is because the Arctic climate itself has transformed. Satellite data collected since the late 1970s shows that the amount of sea ice remaining at the end of summer has fallen by roughly half. September sea ice has been shrinking at around 12% per decade, and the Arctic region is warming nearly 4 times faster than the global average. The Arctic Ocean has not become calm or tropical, but these changes have created a late summer and early autumn window when large sections of the Northern Sea route are lightly ice or sometimes nearly ice-free. Research tracking navigable days shows that the sailing season is getting longer. It also indicates that specially designed ships could gain even more operational days as temperatures continue to rise. For planners in Moscow and Beijing, this is evidence that the route can become a consistent part of global supply chains rather than an annual gamble. Cargo statistics reveal how quickly this passage has evolved from experiment to emerging system. In the early 2010s, volumes along the Northern Sea route were only about 4 million tons. By 2018, they had climbed close to 20 million tons. By 2020, they surpassed 32 million tons, and by 2024 they reached roughly 37.9 million tons. Within that growth, transit cargo, goods moving between major ocean regions, has expanded the fastest. In 2024 alone, transit freight exceeded 3 million tons across 92 voyages. According to Rosatom, the Russian state corporation managing the route, Chinese companies are increasingly purchasing or chartering vessels designed specifically for Arctic container shipping. The number of such voyages doubled between 2023 and 2024. Those steady but quiet increases set the stage for the moment when Istanbul Bridge captured global attention. Meanwhile, Beijing and Moscow were strengthening the political foundation of this corridor. In October 2025, officials from both countries met in Harbin under their joint Northern Sea Route Corporation framework and approved a new action plan and development roadmap. They discussed building what they called a sustainable transport corridor, enhancing logistics systems, and supporting major infrastructure projects connected to the route. In practical terms, both governments now view this Arctic passage as a long-term component of their trade and energy strategies, not merely an emergency alternative when southern waters become unstable. Today, seeing a ship travel across the top of the world no longer feels extraordinary. The more pressing question is what kind of ships, ports, infrastructure, and regulations will be required to keep this frozen highway operating safely through ice, darkness, and extreme weather year after year. What it really takes to sail China's new Arctic path. For China's Arctic trade route to function in the real world, one powerful vessel must go first, an icebreaker. An icebreaker is a heavily reinforced ship with an extra-thick steel hull and enormous engines, designed specifically to break through solid sea ice and create a navigable channel for ordinary cargo ships to follow. And nothing about operating in these waters is easy. Before a vessel even approaches the Arctic zone, its owner must secure approval from Russia. The Northern Sea Route Administration, the agency responsible for overseeing this corridor, reviews every application from ships planning to travel along the far northern coastline. Shipping companies are required to submit detailed documentation proving the strength of the vessel's hull, its official ice classification, engine specifications, onboard safety systems, and the crew's cold weather training. They must also provide a full navigation plan explaining when they intend to enter Arctic waters, which sections of the coast they will follow, and where they plan to exit. This approval process can take months. Authorities carefully study ice maps, weather projections, and the technical capabilities of the vessel before deciding whether to grant access. Even when permission is given, the ship is not simply waved through. An experienced ice pilot, specially trained for Arctic navigation, is assigned aboard the vessel and guide the captain on speed, positioning, and route decisions. Officials also designate which icebreaker will escort the ship and which reporting checkpoints it must contact during the journey. In other words, this is not an open highway where ships can sail freely. It is a tightly managed corridor, controlled step by step by the state. That control is possible because Russia operates the most powerful icebreaker fleet in the world. Current figures show around 41 Russian icebreakers in service, including roughly 34 diesel-powered vessels and 7 nuclear-powered giants, with more still under construction. The nuclear ships are especially crucial. Instead of relying on traditional fuel, they carry compact nuclear reactors that can operate for years without refueling. This allows them to push through ice for extended periods without interruption. These vessels are enormous. The newest ships in the Arktika-class icebreaker series stretch more than 500 feet in length and weigh tens of thousands of tons. Their reinforced bows are shaped to climb onto thick ice and crush it under their weight. When escorting cargo convoys, they move ahead of merchant ships while radar systems and observers scan for heavy ridges. The icebreaker repeatedly reverses and surges forward, smashing a narrow passage through the frozen surface until a dark strip of open water appears, just wide enough for one vessel to follow behind in single file. Supporting this effort is a chain of Arctic ports that transform icebreaking strength into consistent cargo movement. One of the most critical hubs is Sabetta, carved into the icy coastline of the Yamal Peninsula. Adjacent to the port stands a massive Yamal LNG facility. Liquefied natural gas, or LNG, is natural gas cooled to extremely low temperatures until it becomes liquid, dramatically reducing its volume so it can be transported efficiently by sea. At Yamal, gas extracted from vast underground reserves is processed and liquefied directly at the shore. When Yamal LNG loaded its first shipment in late 2017, many observers questioned whether such an operation could succeed in such extreme conditions. Yet within a year of full production, the plant reached its design capacity of about 16.5 million tons annually across 3 major processing units. A fourth smaller unit later increased output to nearly 17.5 million tons per year. By 2024, the terminal exported roughly 21 million tons of LNG in approximately 287 tanker shipments, setting a new performance record for the facility. These shipments do not all travel in one direction. After clearing Arctic waters, some tankers head west toward European markets, while others sail east through the seasonal Arctic window toward Asia. During the summer of 2025, tracking data showed more than 50 departures from Yamal within just 3 months, including direct deliveries to China, South Korea, and Taiwan, alongside cargoes destined for European customers. Across the bay on the Jaidan Peninsula, Russia is expanding this model through its next major development, Arctic LNG 2. Designed to produce nearly 20 million tons of LNG per year once fully operational, this project follows a similar system. Gas is shipped first to Russian transfer hubs and then redirected to global markets. A significant share of these shipments now arrives at China's Beihai terminal, directly connecting Arctic energy fields with Chinese coastal infrastructure. The conclusion is straightforward. China is already deeply integrated into Arctic energy flows moving along this northern passage. None of this would be possible without specialized tankers engineered to survive in extreme ice. Both Yamal LNG and Arctic LNG 2 rely on a fleet known as ARC-7 carriers. These enormous vessels feature double hulls and thick steel plating for added strength. Their front sections are optimized for standard ocean navigation, while their reinforced sterns function like icebreakers. In open water, they travel normally, but when encountering heavy ice, they reverse direction, using their strengthened stern to brake and ride over frozen surfaces. Engineering standards indicate that ARC-7 ships can operate independently in dense ice more than 4 feet thick, and can follow icebreakers through even heavier formations. Their engines and propulsion systems are powerful enough to maintain steady movement in extreme conditions. During sea trials, the first ship of this class, Christophe de Madry, sustained speeds of about 8 miles per hour while pushing through ice roughly 5 feet thick, a capability far beyond that of ordinary vessels. These tankers operate according to a seasonal pattern. In warmer months, when ice coverage decreases, they sail east from Yamal along the northern sea route toward Asian markets, delivering LNG directly to buyers in China and neighboring countries. During winter, when ice becomes too dense along the eastern stretch, they often rear out westward toward European terminals equipped with storage facilities, where the gas can later be redistributed. China's role extends beyond purchasing energy. The country is gradually building its own Arctic capabilities. Its older polar vessel, Shuelong, originally began as a Soviet-built cargo icebreaker before being converted in the 1990s into a Chinese research and supply ship. For many years, it served as China's only polar-capable vessel, supporting both Arctic and Antarctic missions. In late 2019, China introduced a second ship, Shuelong 2, the first domestically built polar research icebreaker. Measuring roughly 400 feet long and more than 70 feet wide, it features advanced hull design and propulsion systems capable of breaking through nearly 5 feet of ice while maintaining controlled forward movement. Unlike many earlier designs, it can break ice both forward and backward, increasing flexibility in confined or difficult conditions. Recent missions have taken Shuelong 2 into Arctic waters north of Alaska and along segments of the Northern Sea Route, providing Chinese crews with direct operational experience in the same environment used for commercial shipping. Development plans indicate that China intends to expand this fleet further. Additional polar vessels and a more powerful heavy icebreaker design are under consideration, potentially capable of carrying around 180 personnel and supporting helicopter operations. Such capabilities would enhance China's reach in scientific research, as well as practical missions like ice scouting and emergency response. China has also established a permanent presence on Arctic land through its Yellow River Station, located in Ny-Ålesund within the Svalbard archipelago, approximately 760 miles from the North Pole. Since opening in 2004, the station has hosted hundreds of research projects and visiting scientists. While its primary focus includes glacier, marine ecosystems, and atmospheric studies, the station also provides valuable long-term data on ice behavior, weather patterns, and ocean conditions, along with a consistent presence in Arctic scientific networks. When you consider the layers of ships, escorts, infrastructure, energy terminals, research stations, and international coordination required simply to move cargo across fractured ice, the scale of this operation becomes clear. And that naturally leads to a larger question. How will this emerging Arctic corridor reshape the established sea lanes and ports that global trade has depended on for generations? Why this Arctic shortcut shakes the global shipping map. Most people rarely think about it, but nearly everything inside a home, a store, or even a smartphone has traveled through a handful of narrow sea passages at some point. These tight maritime corridors connect Asian factories with Western consumers. If even one of them becomes blocked, the shock spreads across the global economy within days. That is why even a limited but functional Arctic shortcut immediately affects global influence, financial flows, and the balance of power in world trade. The most powerful symbol of this traditional system is the Suez Canal. Cutting across Egypt, it connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea and allows ships to move directly between Europe and Asia without sailing around Africa. Between 12 and 15% of total global trade by volume passes through Suez, along with roughly 30% of all container shipments. Each year, goods worth more than $1 trillion transit this channel. It is not a minor passage. It is one of the main pressure valves of the global economy. The toll revenue collected from ships is also one of Egypt's most critical sources of foreign currency. On the opposite side of the planet lies another key artery, the Panama Canal. Stretching across Central America, it links the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Around 5% of global trade flows through Panama, including about 40% of container traffic connected to United States trade. For American commerce alone, roughly $270 billion worth of cargo passes through each year. Shipping schedules, port expansions, rail connections, and logistic strategies along both coasts of the Americas have been designed on the assumption that this canal will operate reliably. Over decades, entire port systems are developed around these two canals, much like branches extending from a central trunk. In Europe, major container hubs in the Mediterranean and the North Sea were positioned to receive and redistribute Suez-bound cargo. In the Middle East and the Red Sea region, ports expanded because almost every container traveling from East Asia to Europe passed nearby. Across the Americas, large East Coast ports depend heavily on steady traffic through Panama, while some West Coast ports rely on cargo that bypasses a canal and moves inland by rail or truck. This structure has made global trade efficient, but also dangerously dependent on a few narrow choke points. Recent events have revealed just how fragile that system can be. In late 2023, Yemen's Houthi forces began targeting commercial vessels in the Red Sea, the southern gateway to the Suez Canal. Within weeks, many of the world's largest container carriers suspended operations along that corridor and redirected ships around the Cape of Good Hope at Africa's southern tip. During the early months of 2024, trade volumes through Suez dropped by about 50% compared to the previous year. By mid-year, total tonnage passing through the canal had fallen by roughly 70%. Meanwhile, traffic rerouted around the Cape surged by nearly 90%. The consequences were immediate. A typical container voyage from Shenzhen to Rotterdam, which normally covers around 10,000 nautical miles and takes about 31 days via Suez, expanded to roughly 13,000 nautical miles and about 41 days when day touring around Africa. That meant an additional week and a half at sea per trip, higher fuel consumption, increased crew costs, and rising freight rates. On certain Asia-Europe routes, container prices temporarily more than doubled as shipping capacity tightened and delays accumulated. For Egypt, the financial impact was severe. In early 2025, The country's president stated that monthly revenue losses from the Suez Canal were reaching approximately $800 million due to the Red Sea disruptions. That income is essential for covering imports and managing national debt. When it declined sharply, the pressure spread to the currency, government finances, and employment levels. The Panama Canal has faced a different kind of crisis, driven not by conflict, but by climate. During 2023 and early 2024, a major drought lowered water levels in the reservoirs that supply the canal's lock system. To preserve operations, authorities were forced to reduce the number of daily ship transits and restrict vessel size and draft. By early 2024, total crossings had fallen by nearly half compared to previous highs, with daily passage slots cut from more than 30 vessels to the mid-teens. This created bottlenecks, forcing shipping companies to adjust routes, reschedule deliveries, and absorb higher costs, particularly affecting United States East Coast and Latin American trade. Taken together, these events highlight a deeper reality. The modern global economy, despite its advanced technology, still depends on infrastructure designed more than a century ago. A small number of canals and straits handle an enormous share of world commerce. When one of them is disrupted, the only alternatives are longer, more expensive detours or waiting in congested queues. In that context, an Arctic passage that significantly reduces the distance between Northern Europe and East Asia becomes far more than a curiosity. It becomes a strategic lever. European economic studies suggest that, during favorable ice conditions, the Northern Sea route can reduce both travel distance and time between Northeast Asia and Northwest Europe by roughly one-third compared to traditional southern routes. Consider the example of a voyage from Murmansk to Yokohama. Through Suez, the journey measures about 12,840 nautical miles. Along the Arctic coast, it drops to roughly 5,770 nautical miles, a reduction of approximately 30 to 40%. Other comparisons show similar savings. A trip from Ningbo to Rotterdam spans about 10,600 miles via Suez, but only around 7,800 miles along the Northern Sea route. In practical terms, a voyage that typically requires 4 to 5 weeks between East Asia and Northern Europe could complete the Central Arctic segment in just over 2 weeks during the open water season. If reliability improves, shipping companies could attempt an additional round trip each year using the same vessel, or operate the same weekly service with fewer ships. This is where the real disruption becomes visible. Even optimistic projections suggest that, under ideal year-round conditions, the Northern Sea route might handle only about 5% of global trade by value. At first glance, that share appears modest. However, much of that potential volume will be diverted from routes currently passing through the Suez Canal and, to a smaller extent, the Panama Canal, as well as from long southern detours. Some models estimate that up to two-thirds of certain Europe and Asia traffic using the Southern Sea route could shift northward. That means even a relatively small slice of total trade could represent a large portion of the high-value, time-sensitive cargo on which major canals and ports heavily depend. Thanks for watching. Now take a look at the videos appearing on your screen for more incredible stories shaping our world.